this workshop, I am independent, so the opinions that I may have in this presentation are not necessarily the opinions of few. So you know. Thank you. And finally, there will be some concluding remarks. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, are organizations that are generally formed independent from governments. They are typically non-profit entities, and many of them are active in humanitarianism and the social sciences. The term NGO is sometimes used synonymously with the term civil society organization, or CSO, which is any association founded by citizens. Just to give you an example, members of a civil society organization that are not members of an NGO are typically academia. In FAO terminology, for example, the term NGO is included in the term CSO, so it's wider. The term NGO, as it is used today, was first introduced in Article 71 of the newly formed United Nations Charter in 1945. According to the UN Department of Global Communications, an NGO is a not-for-profit, voluntary citizens group that is organized on a local, national, or international level to address issues in support of the public good. And for the activities, the NGOs act as implementers, catalysts, and partners. They mobilize, for example, resources to provide goods and services to people who have been affected by a natural disaster. And in that role, they normally work closely with the member states and sometimes the international organizations. In this presentation, I will focus on NGOs' roles as partners. Now, this brings me to the definition of an international non-governmental organization that is often the acronym INGO. An INGO is an NGO which is independent of government involvement, but where the concept of a non-governmental organization is extended to an international scope. The number of INGOs has grown considerably over the last decades. The number was estimated to be approximately 6,000 in 1990, 26,000 in 1999, and 40,000 in 2013, which is the latest figure I could dig out. The technical terms international organizations, or IOs, and intergovernmental organizations, IGOs, describe organizations that may be established by a treaty or by an international or by an instrument governed by international law and possessing its own legal personality. Examples of IOs are international organizations like the UN, FAO, ILO, and IMO. Examples of IGOs are the International Hydrographic Organization, ISO, European Commission, EC, and Tokyo Memorandum of Understanding on Port-State Control, Tokyo MOU, just to mention a few. In contrast, NGOs are defined as any internationally operating organizations which are not established by intergovernmental agreements. Therefore, except for incorporation under national law, no current formal legal status exists for NGOs, which can lead to complications in international law. So there is a great interest by both NGOs and international organizations in working together. I will in the next slides highlight the mutual benefits related to such cooperation. As the content of this presentation is on the role of NGOs in international negotiations, I will concentrate on the NGOs. However, since the three international organizations, that is FAO, ILO, and IMO, often refer to these international non-governmental organizations as NGOs, I am also going to use that acronym in the presentation. So I would like to point out in this regard that the rules of FAO, ILO, and IMO concerning their relations with observer organizations are quite different from one organization to another. Before going into the details of these rules, let's have a look at the benefits of cooperation with NGOs that are common for all three organizations. Namely, that the closer association with NGOs should enhance the validity of decision-making under the auspices of the three organizations. That is common for all. And number one, by ensuring consideration of interests of all social sectors. And two, by building consensus among stakeholders in development. Among the benefits that such cooperation should also attract substantive input into the normative activities and for achieving the overarching goals of the organizations and increase the effectiveness of their field programs by drawing on the expertise, experience, and the insight of the NGOs. Moreover, increased awareness of the work of the organizations should make them better known and accountable by the wider public. Let's now look at the main benefits for the NGOs, i.e. those that have been granted a consultative status with FAO, ILO, or IMO. The international organizations provide access to a neutral forum for discussions vis-à-vis private sector, member states, and other stakeholders. NGOs that are accredited with FAO, ILO, and IMO can participate in a number of events, including but not limited to regular sessions of their governing bodies and subsidiary bodies. So in summary, the NGO may attend official meetings, submit written statements prior to sessions, make oral statements participate in debates, interactive dialogues, panel discussions, and informal meetings. The NGO may also meet official government delegations and other NGO representatives, and organize and attend parallel events and take part during the session. So the NGOs are quite active at the meetings of IMO in particular. Not so much at FAO, and ILO has another structure that I'm going into later. So we will now look at the rules and practices for each of the three organizations for NGOs participation at their meetings. As I said before, these rules differ from one organization to another. Let's start with FAO. The general legal framework concerning participation of CSOs, which include NGOs, as I said before, in meetings and activities of FAO is set forth in the basic texts from 1957. Namely, 1. FAO policy concerning relations with international non-governmental organizations. 2. Granting of observer status in respect of international governmental and non-governmental organizations. And 3. The strategy for partnership with civil society organizations. The basic texts provide that formal relations with an INGO may take one of three forms according to the importance of its field of activity in relation to FAO activities and the level of cooperation envisaged. 1. Consultative status, that is the highest. 2. Specialized consultative status. And 3. Liaison status. Each status reflects a different level of involvement. However, there is a common set of prerequisites, which must be satisfied regardless of status, which is eventually granted. These prerequisites may be summarized as follows. 1. That the organization be international in structure and scope of activity, representative in its field of interest, and 2. Have a permanent directing body, authorized representatives, and systematic procedures. In addition to the INGO's aims and activities, in addition, the INGO's aims and activities must be consistent with FAO's mandate and constitution. Upon request by the interested NGOs, a consultative status is granted by the conference, that is the highest governing body of FAO, on the proposal of the Council or by the Council during intersessional periods. For your information, the FAO conference, as I said before, the highest governing body of FAO. The specialized consultative status and liaison status are granted by the Director General. Formal status granted by FAO to an INGO is kept under review and may be terminated or maintained as appropriate. Now ILO. As a tripartite organization, ILO does not simply collaborate with non-governmental organizations, but actually integrates sectors of civil society into its structure. tripartite, and I'm sure Brant Wagner, who was here 2 days ago, he would have explained this much better than I can do. Tripartite means that the representatives of workers and employers' organizations can participate on an equal basis with governments in the ILO governance structures. The ILO relationship with the non-governmental sector can be summarized as follows. 1. The integration of non-governmental social partners in the identity of the organization itself. 2. According to consultative status to non-governmental international organizations that meet certain criteria. That is similar to FAO. 3. Collaboration at the operational level with a variety of international, regional, national, and local organizations. Therefore, the role of NGOs in international negotiations at ILO is accomplished through the workers and employers organizations in addition to the member governments. Now, IMO. The latest rules that for consultative status for NGOs with IMO are from 2019. Non-governmental international organizations that have the capability to make a substantial contribution to the work of IMO may be granted consultative status by the Council with the approval of the Assembly. Like for FAO and ILO, any organization seeking consultative status with IMO has to demonstrate considerable expertise as well as the capacity to contribute within its field of competence to the work of IMO. In addition, it must also show that it has no means of access to the work of IMO through another organization already in consultative status, and that it is truly international in its membership, namely that it has a range of members covering a broad geographical scope and usually in more than one region. To date, there are 85 international non-governmental organizations in consultative status with IMO. So let's have a look at how FAO, ILO, and IMO cooperate under their respective mandates in combating IUU fishing. There has been a long-standing cooperative relationship between the secretariats of FAO, ILO, and IMO, which stretch back several decades. This cooperative work has been done within the context of each organization's mandate, i.e., IMO for safety at sea and protection of the marine environment, ILO for work on labor standards and working conditions in the fishing industry, and FAO for fisheries in general and fishing operations in particular. Even though this cooperation, which started in early 1960s, has mainly focused on safety and health in the fishery sector, it has in the last 2 decades been expanded to other areas, such as abandoned, lost, or otherwise discarded fishing gear, ALGFG, child labor in fisheries, and IUU fishing. The fight against IUU fishing that involved more international organizations than just FAO started formally in 1999. In 1999, the FAO Committee on Fisheries, COFI, which is one of the governing bodies of FAO, addressed the need to prevent, deter, and eliminate IUU fishing. The committee was concerned about information presented indicating increases in IUU fishing, including fishing vessels flying flags of convenience. Just for your information, the term flags of convenience is frequently used by FAO, but is strictly forbidden by IMO, just so you know. At IMO, they call them open registries. So, where do the NGOs come into this picture? Shortly after the COFI meeting in 1999, an FAO ministerial meeting on fisheries declared that FAO will develop an international plan of action, IPOA, to deal effectively with all forms of IUU fishing through coordinated efforts by states, FAO, relevant regional fisheries management bodies, and other relevant international agencies such as IMO, as provided for in Article 4 of the FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. Article 4 of the Code states, for example, that all members and non-members of FAO, fishing entities and related sub-regional, regional, and global organizations, whether governmental or non-governmental, should actively cooperate with FAO in this work. The UN Commission on Sustainable Development, which also met in 1999, highlighted the issue of flag and port state responsibilities and the need for FAO and IMO to cooperate on solving problems related to IUU fishing. Accordingly, FAO presented a paper to the IMO Maritime Safety Committee suggesting draft terms of reference for an ad hoc working group. The first session of the joint FAO-IMO ad hoc working group on IUU fishing and related matters was held in Rome in October 2000. I would like to highlight in this regard that ILO took part in these meetings from the start, that is from 2000. However, it was not until 2019 that ILO became a formal member of the group that was subsequently renamed as the joint FAO-ILO-IMO ad hoc working group on IUU fishing and related matters. So far, 4 meetings of the joint working group have been held. The first one was in 2000 in Rome, where 2 NGOs participated. The second meeting was held in 2007, also in Rome, with 1 NGO participating. The third meeting was held in 2015 in London, with the participation of 5 NGOs. And finally, the 4th meeting was held in 2019 in Torremolinos, Spain, with the participation of 12 NGOs and 1 invited expert. So, for me, this demonstrates that there is a growing interest amongst the NGOs in cooperating with FAO, ILO, and IMO in combating IUU fishing worldwide. Just to point out that TMT that gave a presentation yesterday they were participating in the meeting in 2019. So in the next slides, I'm going to talk about the Pew Charitable Trust. It's an NGO or an INGO that is supporting the fight against IUU fishing. Since I retired from FAO in 2018, I have been working as a consultant for Pew. I would like to stress in this regard, as I said before, that I'm not representing Pew at this workshop, and the observations expressed in this presentation are my own. Pew is an INGO that is driven by the power of knowledge to solve today's most challenging problems. Pew operates across a large-scale range of projects, including healthcare, social issues, and environment. Over the years, Pew has been providing support to measures in combating IUU fishing worldwide. For example, to FAO. IUU fishing is linked to safety at sea in the fishery sector and decent conditions on board fishing vessels. These links have been recognized by the 3 international organizations that are dealing with fishing operations. That is FAO, ILO, and IMO. In this regard, it has been recognized by FAO that the 2012 Cape Town Agreement, as well as ILO Working Fishing Convention, that is ILO 188, will not only improve safety at sea in the fishery sector, but also contribute to the fight against IUU fishing. When the FAO Port State Measures Agreement, PSMA, entered into force in 2016, it therefore became a logical step for Pew to support IMO's work in promoting the Cape Town Agreement with the aim of bringing the agreement into force as soon as possible. In 2017, the IMO Council decided to grant the Pew Charitable Trust a consultative status with IMO. Pew has been very busy after the consultative status to IMO was granted in 2017. It has participated in IMO meetings, which includes the Assembly, MSC, the III Subcommittee, and others. Pew did co-sponsor the Ministerial Conference on Fishing Vessel Safety and IUU Fishing that was held in Torremolinos, Spain in October 2019. It also co-sponsored the regional and national seminars and webinars on the implementation and ratification of the 2012 Cape Town Agreement. Pew has prepared promotion material on the Cape Town Agreement, including 2 videos. And Pew is currently participating in the development of a new guidance document to assist government competent authorities in the implementation of the 2012 Cape Town Agreement. And finally, some concluding remarks. NGOs play an important role in the work of FAO, ILO, and IMO. There are mutual benefits for the international organizations as well as the NGOs in working together towards a common goal, in this case, combating IUU fishing. It is encouraging to see the growing interest among NGOs in cooperating with FAO, ILO, and IMO on fisheries-related issues in general. However, despite the interest in cooperating with international organizations, there is still an important group of stakeholders in the fishery sector that is not yet represented at international level. You may already know which stakeholder group I'm referring to, and this is a question for you. Any ideas? Rafael? Francis? The fishermen? Yeah, the fishers. No, they are represented through ITF, and ITF has participated in all of the meetings of the joint working group from the start. So it's not the fishermen, but you are close. Sonja? Interpol? No. Well, Interpol is a governmental organization, isn't it? Yes. The consumers? That's a good point. It's a good point. I don't hear very well from the back. The market. Yes, well, the same as consumers. It's a good point. They should be there. But this is not the stakeholder group I had in mind. So the group I had in mind are the fishing vessel owners and operators. There are many NGOs representing the fishing vessel owners and operators at national and regional level. But so far, they don't exist at international level. This is surprising, as the fishing industry is truly international. According to 2022 FAO report on the state of world fisheries and aquaculture, SOFIA, the international trade on fisheries and aquaculture products has grown significantly in recent decades. In 2020, world exports of and I'm talking about exports only, not consumption, exports of aquatic products worth more than 150 billion US dollars. The fishery export revenues, i.e. exports minus imports, of developing countries alone are higher than other agricultural commodities combined, such as meat, tobacco, rice, and sugar. This illustrates that there is a lot of money in the industry, which is particularly important for countries that depend on export of their fisheries products, in particular developing countries. For the honest fishing vessel owners and operators, international rules are not only a matter of operating safely and legally, but such rules make sure that there is a level playing field for all. Please note in this regard that fish that is caught illegally by unsafe vessels is often sold at the same markets as fish that is caught legally by safe vessels. When we compare the fishery sector with the merchant sector, we see that more than 10% of the NGOs which have been granted a consultative status with IMO are representing the ship owners and operators. That is the merchant ship owners. This illustrates clearly, in my opinion, that merchant ship owners and operators recognize the importance of being part of the negotiations on international instruments concerning merchant ships through NGOs. So, is there a light at the end of the tunnel? There might be. Last month, a news article was published with the title Seafood Industry, which was referred to by the back, Partnerships Push for Improved Fisher Safety. This article confirms that NGOs' interest in fisheries-related issues is growing. The article states that 5 groups, which include as members over 150 companies from across the seafood supply chain, have released a joint statement calling for actions to improve the safety of the global fishing industry. IUU fishing is also mentioned in this article that I'm not going into. You can Google it. The article also informs about a new research which was recently released by the Pew Charitable Trust in conjunction with the Fish Safety Foundation. According to this new research, the global fisher mortality is estimated to be 3 to 4 times higher than seen in previous assessments. I suggest that you keep your eyes open as more news on this are expected soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ari. Fascinating, get an insight into this sort of area that we've only just begun to explore within the catfish workshops. I'm sure there must be some questions out there for Ari. I certainly have one that I'm keen to go. Down the front here is Dr. Han.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ari, for your insightful presentation. I came to know new things, a lot of new things from you. Actually, your question about who should be participate more to the international organizations through the NGO. But I also thought that the fishing company and owner is sometimes they are represented through the state members in the international organizations. But when I look back my experience, I sometimes see there is some kind, they are not fully represented through sometimes government. So I think I really agree with your ideas, but my question to you is, what kind of NGOs in future can represent fishing company or fishing the operators? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. It is relevant, and I agree with you that many vessel owners and operators, they are represented through their flag states, where they often sit in with the delegations at IMO in particular as advisors. But what I was referring to was internationally, they don't have a voice. They could have a voice, and as I understood your question, who should that be? Well, if I may go back here, you can see if you look at the list of the NGOs that represent the industry at IMO, some of them are very generic, like the International Chamber of Shipping. That is one of the oldest NGOs that that got consultative status with IMO. And you can see also some that are very specific, only for tankers. I could imagine, I mean, if you look at the fisheries world, we have, that is my feeling, that the tuna fishing vessel owners and operators, they are well organized. It seems to me that it's a well-run business. So if I should mention somebody, they could start by applying for a consultative status with the two organizations, FAO and IMO in particular. The NGOs that represent the seafood sector, possibly they could represent the vessel owners as well. I know that in some of the NGOs that are representing the seafood, the vessel owners are included there. I don't have the answer, but we see that in some regions like Europe has. As I understand, they more or less cover all of the vessel owners, most of the vessel owners and operators in Europe. So they exist regionally, but globally, ILO, as I said before, they include the NGOs into the structure. So when the ILO Working Fishing Convention was negotiated in 2005 and then adopted in 2007, ILO made sure that all of the regions were represented in the employers group. So they had Europass there, and they had some vessel owners associations in the regions representing at least part of the region, just to make sure that there was a global coverage when that convention was negotiated. I don't have the answer to you, but I'm raising this issue because there might be some of your students that may be able to take on board that role later on in their career, and keep that in mind. I mean, if they meet somebody who is representing the fishing industry in their region, they might ask about this, whether they are planning to have a global NGO or organization representing their interests at IMO. I find it very important to have the vessel owners in this process. We have seen it again and again that it is an obstacle that the vessel owners are not part of the negotiations. For example, in Torremolinos in 2019, it was the biggest conference on fishing-related issues organized by IMO ever. There were more than 700 participants. There were ministers, I think 70 ministers or vice ministers. A declaration was signed at the end of the conference, the Torremolinos Declaration, that has now been signed by 51 states, where they committed to ratify the Cape Town Agreement by 11th of October 2022. That was last week. Only 4 came forward and ratified, and Peru was one of them. Thank you, Peru.
Well done, Peru.
But the point I was going to make, the minister may be convinced that, that his country should ratify. When he or she comes back to the capital, he will call the stakeholders in and inform them that he had signed the Torremolinos Declaration and committed the country to sign. And the vessel owner representative, who has been out of the picture all the time, he will say, Cape Town Agreement, what is that? He doesn't even know what it is. And he will probably say to the minister, well, if it has something to do with regulations, new requirements, it only means two things: additional administrative burden for you and additional cost for me. End of story.
Yeah,
This is
certainly a
why
gap there.
it's so important to bring the vessel owners on board.
Yeah, I would certainly agree.
I hope this answered your question.
Perhaps if I could just put one question to you, Ari, which is one of the criteria to enter or to become part of IMO or FAO is for the international status of the NGO. So how do you ensure that that's truly the case? Because many NGOs start out at a national level, and you know, it's potentially a conflict of interest between the state from which they are and them joining into an international organization. But in the case of someone like Pew, for example, they are based in the US, but they are an international organization. So how does one ensure that there isn't some kind of conflict of interest between that kind of primary basis and their true international status, and that they may be pushing the agenda of their state?
Well, an NGO is normally independent of government. And so to begin with, they are usually not dependent on the state where they are originated. For Pew, well, and others, they have to go through this scrutiny. The IMO Council, in case of IMO, it will go through a list of answers that have been given by the NGO when applying for a consultative status. And they have to be able to demonstrate several things: that their work is closely related to the mandate of IMO. And they have to be able to demonstrate that they will be able to contribute to the goals of IMO, overarching goals. And what I think is the most difficult one is that they have to be able to demonstrate that they cannot participate in another delegation that is already taking care of what seems to be what they are suggesting to do. And the Pew was able to do that. And all of the member states in IMO Council, they have to agree. If one objects, that's the end of it.
Okay, it's good to know there's a rigorous process there. And
yeah, it is, and there is a reason for this. If you allow the private sector to come into the negotiations between governments on an international treaty, you have to be sure that they are trustworthy and they are able to help in the process, not to throw a spanner in the work. It seems that some NGOs, they are just that. They are always pointing their fingers at the international organizations or some of the member states, saying you are not doing this and that, and this is not what IMO wants. They want somebody who can help.
Okay, thank you. Ife, we've got a question at the back.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I have learned a lot, including the fact that you actually allowed us to engage was really interesting to see. But my question relates to representation and who is represented. You talked about how NGO representation have grown over the years. And so I'd like you to talk us through who are these NGOs? Are they primarily NGOs from the global north? In which case, where are the NGOs from the majority world who actually, a lot of the times are at the receiving end of some of these policies we're discussing? Thank you.
I'm not quite sure if I got the question right, but you were asking about the NGOs' participation in the work of the three organizations, or?
So these NGOs that you told us about,
Yeah.
where are they from mainly? Are they from the Western world, or should I say northern, global north? Is there representation from NGOs from the global south who, of course, would have represented people that are also affected by these issues that the main organizations you talked about are trying to address? Thank you.
Well, as I said in my presentation, one of the prerequisites for granting a consultative status to an NGO, it has to be international. So EuroPES, for example, it cannot apply because it is European only. It has to be international to begin with. I thought you were going to ask about the participation in the joint working group. I was part of the team that planned the third one that was held in London in 2015. And the question came up, who of the NGOs are able to participate? Because the rules between FAO and IMO at that time, ILO was not a formal partner by then, and it was decided right away. If the NGO is in a consultative status with one, that is either FAO or IMO, it can participate. There was, well, it has nothing to do with NGOs as such, but when it came to the European Commission, which is an IGO, when the FAO team came to IMO, to London, I saw that they had been put at the back of the room, like they are in IMO. So I said no, because at FAO, the European Commission has a different status. At the FAO, the European Union, they negotiate fisheries-related matters on behalf of their member states. So they had to be seated amongst the member states. So they were brought from the back of the room to, well, they not physically, but it was recognized that they had the same status as the member states that were representing FAO and IMO at the meeting. So, but the first part of my answer, did it answer your question? No.
I think, Ari, it's mainly to do with whether there is a a significant bias of the NGOs being fundamentally from the global north in terms of Europe and North America relative to representation from the global south in terms of Africa, South America, and such like. And I guess that probably is the case.
Well, if you look at this list here, I mean, for me, this looks very Northern Hemisphere group.
Yeah.
But if you look at the member states, the flag states, where are the flag states where most of the merchant ships are registered? Panama, Liberia. I mean, I assume that most of these NGOs, they represent the ship owners in those countries, or that decides to register their ships in these open registries.
Yeah, thank you, Francis. Thank you very much, Ari. Again, it's always a lot of food for thought in your presentation, and thank you for that, and quite a lot of information. I will just start with a small comment, if you don't mind, on the question of this representation, and also some hypotheses, maybe, to give to you and probably to the floor to think about. The first comment here is just like international representation does not mean power. And here it's very clear, as you highlighted, the ITF has been from the beginning inside the negotiation related to fisheries and IU fishing. But when we see the outcome of the working in fisheries convention C188, when we see the law standards agreed there, it shows that basically international representation does not mean power and possibility to alter the negotiations toward betterment of working conditions, despite the fact that the ITF has always been present as a representative of the workers. So I think we have also to distinguish and to clarify this distinction, because it's very important that international representation does not mean power. And here I'm just now coming to still the same notion, because in the ILO, I mean, when we see the result of the negotiation with the C188, and when we see the incredible standards, in fact, it's really incredible standards, which completely disappeared anywhere ashore for more than 2 centuries, what is acceptable today for fishers, it shows that the employer's power was extremely successful without being completely organized. And I think I will jump on what was saying Dr. Han. The capacity of the employers to pass through their states, and also having the influence by their own group and after through the states, give them an incredible and enhanced power in terms of negotiation. I'm not going to expand also on this particular groups that we all know quite well, and we know that they are also extremely influential through the flag state, for example. So it's a double influence, how as an NGO, national or international, you can also buy power through the state. So that's just this aspect I think is very important. Now for this question itself about international representation or missing international representation, and here I mean 2 hypotheses. I don't know if they are good or not, but I think it's probably interesting to discuss. First of all, if you have an international representation, it means at a certain point all the owners agree on a minimum terms, which mean that this international representative body will be a kind of self-disciplined system around the ship owners. So it means that all ship owners need to accept this kind of internal discipline, because if they don't accept it, basically they will be excluded. And if they are excluded, they will not be able to bring back anymore, and they will be completely outside any form of negotiation. So I think some of them may be afraid of that. Which leads to another, I would say, hypothesis, is it not also an indication that there is no consensus among the ship owners to stop IU fishing? It's probably also an implicit demonstration that the owners are not interested in stopping IUU fishing. If they were interested, probably they were building a consensus to move forward. But here, by being unable to build this consensus, it shows also that probably by using national power, they have more leverage on what they want to achieve as owners. That's just hypothesis. Probably in research needs to be a little bit developed, but I don't know if you think it makes sense.
No, all of this makes sense. Thank you for that. I wanted to point out one thing. I participated in the conference that was held in Torremolinos in 1993, where the Torremolinos Protocol was negotiated and adopted. During the development of the protocol, the convention that was from 1977 was criticized, mainly by countries from East and Southeast Asia, because they simply said, this convention, it is only for the European vessels, and that's true. And in fact, the protocol was also with the same problem, even though some of the requirements had been lowered, so to speak. It was not enough. When you think about the distribution of fishing vessels in the world, about, 70% of the global fleet is in Asia. And you sit down and negotiate an international convention that doesn't take their interest into account. It is going to fail. So this is what we had in mind when we developed the Cape Town Agreement. We had to address all of these problems. In 2004, IMO organized a regional seminar in Beijing, China, and invited 12 member states in the region to the conference. There were 2 participants for each member state, one representing the maritime sector and the other the fisheries sector. That was the first time IMO even thought about talking to the fisheries people, because normally they are not represented at IMO. And this was a success. We were able to identify all of the difficulties. They were mainly technical with the Torremolinos Protocol. And on the basis of that meeting, of the identified difficulties, that is where the development of the Cape Town Agreement started. So it started a few years later and ended with an adoption in 2012 in Cape Town. So my message has always been, all the difficulties that were identified by these big member states that have big fishing fleets, they have all been solved. So there is nothing that should stop member states in ratifying now. But as I said, and this brings me to the NGOs, if the fishing vessel owners are not on board in negotiations, and because the negotiations is not only about expressing power and trying to convince others around the negotiating table, but it's also to listen, try to learn about what they are trying to do. And if somebody who has been at the negotiations about the Cape Town Agreement, for example, he or she would be able to answer the minister. I mean, yes, I think this is a good idea. This is not going to affect us at all.
Okay, well, I think some important lessons to be learned there, and certainly I think we should move on for the sake of time, but I'd like to thank Ari once again. Thank you very much, Ari.
Thank you.